I think we are probably training rate of force development, but then once we do that for a few weeks, what is almost certainly happening is we're choosing a stressor that allows us to get a fair amount of volume in without beating the hell out of our bodies. You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship.
Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. I am Scott Hambrick. With me is Matt Reynolds. And as a follow-up to a show we recently did on conjugate versus concurrent training, we turned off the microphones on that show, and then we kept talking about it. And we're like, Let's not talk about this until we turn the microphones back on again. So here we are. Do you want to set the stage?
Well, we've talked a lot about. I in that previous episode we talked that Louis Simmons at Westside was really one of the first guys to apply what he considered speed training, or what he called dynamic effort method, or a speedy type method, a power method to powerlifting. And caveat here, obviously, is that powerlifting is a terrible word. Powerlifting is heavy ass weight, move slow, right? Weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting, is light ass weight, move fast. So they're called the wrong thing. Powerlifting should be called weightlifting, weightlifting should be called powerlifting, but they're not. So here we go, back to this bullshit vernacular, right? Same kind of stuff that we argued in that podcast, that Louis called what he does conjugate method when it's really concurrent. So the thing that we started to talk about off the air is, what is the purpose for this dynamic effort training, this speed training? And the way Louis used it, and really probably the way most of us still use it today, and certainly the way that I program it, is going to be a high number of sets of 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 sets total, low number of reps per set, usually 2 or 3 reps, maybe only even 1, almost never more than 3. And it's often used on relatively short rest, so maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes rest, and often with accommodating resistance, so often with bands or chains attached to the bar. And the idea is to produce the maximum amount of force with submaximal loads. So the weight tends to be in, say, the 60 to 75% range. And if there's bands or chains on the bar, that means that the actual iron on the bar, the weight on the bar, is less. So you might only have 50% of weight on the bar plus an extra 20% or so of load being given by the bands or chain. And you just move the bar as fast as you can, right? You're trying to exert maximal force. And what Louis has said all along is that will help make a lifter more speedy, more powerful, faster, greater, faster rate of force development. So when you hear that word, that term, rate of force development, the idea is, how long does it take you to go from zero force to maximal force, 100% force? And Louis thinks that if you do speed training, it gets better. It gets shorter. If it took you, if you're trying to do a speed work off the floor with a deadlift and a bunch of bands, and you're trying to go from zero amount of force to pulling on the bar at 100%, and you're completely untrained, it might take you 3 seconds. I'm just throwing out a bullshit number. Mm-hmm. 3 seconds to exude maximal force on the bar. And Louis says if you train that, you can actually reduce that way down to like 1 second, 1.2 seconds, whatever, right? Like you can really get faster and more explosive, and teach all those motor units and muscle fibers to fire at the same time. Okay. And so the question is, the reason we want to have this conversation is that really what's going on? And we're going to tackle it, I think, today more from this sort of Aristotelian sort of. Did I say that word?
Yeah, maybe.
Like we're going to use what we see and what we've in our experiences, and combine it with our logic, and say, like, what's actually going on here? Because and the last thing I'll say, and I'm going to turn it over to you for a second, is that here's what I've seen in powerlifting culture over the past, say, 15 years. From, say, in the 2000s, from 2000s to 2019, it's been almost 20 years. In the late 90s, early 2000s, every powerlifter on earth was pro Westside, pro speed work. We got to do dynamic effort lifting. We got to do dynamic effort stuff for squats and deadlifts and bench press. And then you got into sort of like maybe 2006 to 2012, 13, and the pendulum swung the opposite direction. Everybody's like, well, what is that actually doing? Like, nobody actually gets faster. And so you really saw the speed work sort of go away. And then it has started to come back over the last 5 or 6 years, but I think for a different reason. And what we have seen is that some people probably can't put their finger on it, and I don't know if we're going to be able to really put our finger on it today, but that it seems like the lifters who are doing speed work, along with the other stressors, high-intensity work, some repetition, like hypertrophy type work as well, seem to make better progress than those who don't. We may not know exactly why that is, but they seem to be making really good progress. So then the question is, what's really going on with speed work? What's really going on with the dynamic effort method? What is the stressor that is caught? Like, do we actually get faster? Do we actually decrease rate of force development? Do we get faster at those sort of things? Do we get more powerful? What's going on? So that's what we're going to try to answer today.
We know, I think we know, we seem to know that we really can't make people more powerful. Like, other than teaching somebody technique, I can't get someone who can't touch the rim on the basketball goal to dunk. I mean, if they have some technique problems, we can make them a little more explosive just because we show them how to more efficiently put the force on the ground and elevate. You know, we just can't really do much about, you know, how many motor units they have and how many muscle fibers they can recruit. We don't really seem to be able to do anything like that. So what the heck is going on? I often will do the speed stuff in the midweek for somebody whose deadlift is starting to stall out at the end of LP. 6 sets of 2, 8 sets of 2, something like that, and light, like you were talking about. Well, why would I do that? What do I think's happening? I don't think I'm making that person more explosive. I'm giving them some light pulling work. So by doing 8 sets of 2 on the minute, or 6 sets of 2 on the minute, or on the 90-second mark, I end up just periodizing it. I mean, I end up just having to pick a weight that they can do like that.
Yeah.
And so I end up getting the deload. So the deload's incidental. So I think they needed that midweek deload on the deadlift. And then I'm also just breaking the mental habit of going slow off the floor with the deadlift. I don't think I'm making them more explosive, but I got a guy that's at the end of LP. Let's say he's pulling 390 for 5. Well, that ain't going to be fast.
Right. Even the first rep is probably slow.
Yeah.
Decently slow.
And
the last rep is brutally slow.
Brutally slow. But it's been my experience that if I give them some of this quote-unquote speed work, they'll bust that first one off the floor faster in the future. And so instead of a set taking 22 seconds, maybe I can get them to do a set in 17, and it makes a difference. And I think the only difference, I don't think I changed their muscle fibers. I don't think they've got more motor units than they had, although they might. We'd have to do a biopsy to find out.
Probably not. Right.
I think we're just trying to change the habit of squeezing it off the flow exquisitely slow. That's all.
Right. Yeah. So, there's a lot to unpack there. I think we can walk through it in sort of a systematic way. So, the easiest way to talk about power is you mentioned it. Is it really with the vertical jump, right?
Yep.
So we take all the extra bullshit away. Bands, chains, weights, barbells, everything. When you take somebody and you see how high they can jump. And we know that we can't improve their vertical jump very much, right? So for people who are the haters out there, you basically said we can't improve that really much at all, right? And compared to how much we can improve their force production or their strength, that is definitely true. However, my experience has been as a coach and a lifter, and at one point in my life would have called myself an athlete, I do actually think you can increase your practical right now vertical jump some amount. And I actually think it's significant. I think it might be 10%, 15%. Now, how long does it take to increase 10 or 15% in strength? Well, not that long, right? Stay with me for a second. So here's the thing.
Let me ask one clarifying question. Do you think that 10% comes from improvements in technique or actual muscle fiber changes and physiological changes?
I definitely do not think it's structural or physiological change.
Okay.
I definitely do not think it's that. I don't know that it's not that, but I do not think it's that, right?
Okay.
I think it's motor pattern stuff. I think it's that, right? So, and I know this because I've tried this in my own life. You've busted my balls for a long time where I always say, like, I'm a real average athlete and whatnot. And you're like, you're not. You're a good athlete. Like, you were an average to poor athlete, and you look at a guy like John Welburn that we had the podcast. I mean, that guy was an incredible athlete. To this day, if I go out to a basketball court right now, 42 years old, haven't done anything athletic, haven't jumped in a year, I don't know, and I jump up, I don't know if I could touch the rim today.
Right.
But if I go out and I practice jumping, and I don't know that my technique is going to be that much better. Like, I know how to vertical jump, right? I don't even know that my technique is going to get that much better. I think there is a little bit of a trainable aspect to that. And within a couple weeks or a couple workouts, I think that I could actually jump up and grab the rim, even at 40 years old today and 290 pounds. I think that I could I think I could practically increase my vertical jump probably 4 inches over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Now, I think all I'm really doing there is I'm just maximizing my genetic potential at 40 years old. Now, I could have jumped higher at 19 because I had younger, more elastic tendons and things like that than I have today. So I do think I can increase that some, right? Now, here's the question. Once I get there, like after the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, if I can increase my vertical jump, let's say I go out today and my vertical jump is 20 inches, and I work on it for a few weeks and I get it to 24 inches, which I think I can absolutely do. Can I get it to from 24 to 28? And my experience says absolutely not. I can't.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is that improving your vertical jump from 20 inches to 24 inches is probably not that important for anyone. And the reason I think it gets a lot of press is because if you're an NFL player or a future potential NFL player with a 33-inch vertical and you increase it 10%, and now your vertical is 36 and a quarter, that's a couple $1 million difference on your contract. But like in the grand scheme of things, going from a 20-inch vertical to 24, like that doesn't really change anything about your life, right? Yeah. So now that's pure power, no barbell, no weights, no accommodating resistance, no bands or chains, no anything, right? I think a similar thing happens in the weight room. I think we go in the weight room, and the first thing you have to teach people late into their novice phases is how to grind. They don't know how to grind, and grinding is slow. And then you teach them how to grind, and they learn how to grind, and they learn how to grind and lift slow. But it's a ton of force production. It's not super powerful. The meters per second on the barbell, it's not moving real fast, right? I think there is some trainability in coming back and doing that speed work to teach them how to move a little faster.
Yeah.
How to learn how to exert maximal force into that bar a little faster than they were. And I don't think what we're doing is, I think you're just sort of maxing out their genetic potential for where they are in their life at that moment, right? Whether they're 22 or 32 or 52. I think you're maxing out that genetic potential, and then you're there, and you're as fast as you could possibly be. I think the same thing would happen if I took you out and I said, Scott, I'm going to teach you how to run a 40-yard dash or a 40-meter sprint, right? I think that whatever you ran that 40-yard dash in today would be significantly slower than what I could get you to run it in a month from now. Let's say you ran a 40-yard dash, you ran it in 5.6 seconds. I think I might be able to get you down to 5.3 over the next month. But I don't know that I'm ever getting you to a 4.9. I don't think it's ever going to happen. No matter how much speed work I do, no matter how many speed ladders or agility drills or speed work or speed squats or whatever I do, I don't think that's ever going to give me. So I do think there's a short-term trainable aspect in speed dynamic effort training. My experience says there is so. Now I'll get back to what you said. So what are we actually doing after those first 2, 3, 4 weeks? Like, I think it's just the right amount of stress. So I can do 8 sets of 3 at 75%. Or I can do 3 sets of 8 at 75%. Which one's harder? 3 sets of 8 at 75% fucking sucks.
Yep.
And 8 sets of 3, doable.
Yeah.
Fast, quick, more practice on the first rep, right?
The first one you mentioned might not even be possible.
Correct. That's right.
3 by 8 at 75%. Maybe you can't do it.
Well, we've talked about this with MED stuff. What's the first thing you do with upper body lifts? Like we know in the squat, the first thing we do is we go to a Wednesday light day. What's the first thing you do with upper body lifts? 3 sets of 5 to 5 sets of 3.
Yeah.
You miss your 3 sets of 5. Let's do 5 sets of 3 at the same weight. They get it every time.
Yeah.
So it's the same it's tonnage. I can keep making tonnage go up. It's the same volume. It's still 15 reps, but I can keep driving that tonnage number up, right? So that 8 sets of 3, short rest, more practice for people who are going to be competitive lifters, who are going to do a 1 rep max squat in a powerlifting or strength lifting meet, a 1 rep max bench press or press, and the same thing for the deadlift. 8 sets of 3 get you far better practice for that than 3 sets of 8.
Yeah.
Far better. And I think it's far less stressful. And I think it's just as beneficial, if not more so. And so I think really that's what we're doing is we're trying to train those things. I think it is an adequate way to deload somebody. It's not a ton of stress. I'm still applying maximum force to the bar, at least perceived maximum force. So what you often tell somebody, if someone can deadlift 455 and they're going to do their speed work at 315, 305, you say, pretend it's 455. Pull it as hard and fast as you possibly can. And I usually have to tell somebody like, hey, I don't mean rush through the setup. Set up the same speed, squeeze your chest up, get in a nice perfect position when that weight feels like it's about to break off the ground on the deadlift. Go. Boom. Boom. Fast you can go, right? I think that's far better than 3 sets of 8. So I think that's really what we're doing.
Boom.
Boom. Me too. I do the same thing. I type that all the time on online coaching. Boom. I think that's, or I say fire, right? Fire in all capital letters. Get real tight, ready to go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Fire. Right.
That song, there's a song, Fire by Arthur Brown.
Mm-hmm.
That is on our, we have a PR list in Spotify that we have queued up for Sonos in the gym all the time. Right. That's my brother-in-law's PR song.
Oh, it's Fire by Arthur Brown.
So you can listen to that.
I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, it's crazy shit. If what you say is true about getting like 10% more explosiveness out of somebody, that's worth getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's worth getting. And that's
you know where you see that, by the way? Can you think of a lift? Like, there's a lift that I can think of that I see that. Actually, there's a couple lifts I see that on. I'll tell you where I see that. I see that improvement very practically and very real. Like, I see it.
Well, it's
rack pulls and press lockouts. When somebody does a rack pull, it's heavy. You ever watch them? If it's the first couple times you have a client do a rack pull, they don't know it takes like 5 seconds for the weight to break off the pins.
Yeah.
And so they'll pull, and then they'll stop pulling, and the weight never breaks off the pin. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You got to keep pulling. It is going to break off the pin, and once it breaks off the pin, it's going to move fast.
Right.
And if you tell them to keep practicing that, you'll notice that over time, the time it takes them to break the barbell off the pins goes from 5 seconds to 4 seconds to 3 seconds to maybe even 2.5 seconds or whatever, right? Like you see a clear reduction in time. And that's the rate of force development that Louis is talking about. And I do think that's important to train. Now, again, I think when you finally get there, let's say like the best you can do is 2.5 seconds. I don't think you can ever train your rate of force development to get down to 1.5 seconds. I think you're just going to maximize, like, and I think a guy like you that's less athletic, it's going to take you a little longer to pull on the bar than it will be for Charity to pull on the bar, who's more athletic. Yep. You guys could both do 90% rack pulls, and it's going to take longer for your weight to break off that pin than it is for Charity. Now, I think that press lockouts or pin presses, whatever you want to call it, are the same thing. That middle of the road, that kind of no man's land lift that starts from a dead stop in the bottom. It'd be the same thing if you did a bottoms up squat. I just don't program bottoms up squats, right? If you put the bar on the pins, you got underneath it, and you started pushing, you'd be like, I don't even want to think about it. I used to do those good mornings. That was another thing. Westside was very big into good mornings. They thought good mornings carried over to your squat and deadlift as good as anything. I like good mornings. I think we're going to shoot a Barbell Logic video on that next week. But Westside would often do a bottoms up good morning. Like you'd set the bar on the pins, or you'd suspend the bar from chains way down where you're like almost at parallel to the ground, your torso, and you just go, and you start trying to stand up with the thing. It's brutal. It sucks. Inevitably, what you would do, especially if it was in chains is a good cheater way, is you would rock it backwards in the chain, back kind of over your heel. You'd bend your knees, you'd drop your butt, you get your torso more vertical, and you stand up with the thing and kind of squat it up. And so I think it's probably doing something like that would be far better if you did it off the pins, because it would give you less opportunity to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think we are probably training rate of force development, but then once we do that for a few weeks, what is almost certainly happening is we're choosing a stressor that allows us to get a fair amount of volume in without beating the hell out of our bodies.
Yeah, you can't do 3x5 forever. You can't do 5
by
one
5,
set of 5
three,
forever.
3x8,
whatever.
Can't do, right? Yeah.
And I think one of the happy consequences, to say this same thing in another way, one of the happy consequences of this Westside thing is that it just automatically, and so they're max effort, by the way, like all of it's max effort, right? So if they're like, we're doing speed day, that's as heavy as they can go for speed doubles, right?
No, they waive it. It'll be waived.
Is it?
So basically what they would do is they would still train it in the 60% range, 70% range, and they called it a circa max phase. And what they would do is they would take that same amount of weight and they would put bands on the bar. And now they're squatting that same weight they were squatting for speed weight, but with bands on the bar. And the next week they come in and they put more bands on the bar and then more bands on the bar. And so they were basically waiving the amount of load that was on the bar because they would waive the amount of band tension that was on the bar. And yes, during a circa max phase, they would literally get up to the point where the weight at the top of, say, a squat would be 115% what your all-time max was, but at the bottom might only be 80% because the way the bands would deload in the bottom. We'll do a future episode on actual accommodating resistance and talk about why we use that stuff. But so it depends.
They end up undulating,
absolutely,
just because of the way they select the exercises.
Correct.
But that 10% of explosiveness that you think that can be trained is worth breaking the habit of just going slow. Like we've got the habit of going slow if you have a successful LP. Yeah, and learning to fire and know when to go slow and when to go fast is important. Right. Squat slow to the hole and then fire up. That's important to teach. But I think there is something metabolic going on. If you require somebody to go undergo a load on the minute,
absolutely,
on the minute, stress recovery adaptation. That stress is going to drive them to be able to recover more quickly instead of taking our 3 to 5 to 8 to 10 minutes in between our heavy sets.
That's
you got
right.
a minute to get on top of this, and that should help our client recover that sort of single factor recovery, right? The glycogen, the ATP, whatever that is.
It's probably creatine phosphate more than anything else. It's a ATP CP system. It probably becomes way more efficient, right? So you think about if you wanted to do this like a science experiment and you wanted to put a heart rate monitor on your chest and do these things, what you would notice is if you did them every minute on the minute or even every 90 seconds in the beginning is that your heart rate at the start of each subsequent set would be higher and higher and higher. And by the time you got to like set 7 or set 8, your heart rate's going to be real high. Right. The more you do that, you're going to train your system for your heart rate to jump up real high during the actual lifting and then start to come back down. And by the time you get ready to do that next set, every time it's going to be back to, 128, 130. It's not going to be 97 probably, but it's whereas the first time you do it, your heart rate's going to be humming at 155, 160, and it's time to start the next set. And you're going to be like, fuck, this sucks, right? So that's going to happen. And then the other thing that's probably happening metabolically is your body's becoming more efficient at restoring, resynthesizing creatine phosphate into ATP, right? So especially because you're using short burst reps, you're just doing like 2 reps or 3 reps. It's usually 2 reps if it's lower body and it's 3 reps if it's upper body. That's traditional. Certainly you could do either for whatever you want. But you're not really getting into that glycolytic mode that much. Like we know that all three energy systems are working. The ATP-CP system is working. The glycolytic system is working. And certainly there's a heavy aerobic component in the rest period, during the rest period, right? Like you're breathing, you're probably just about maxing out that aerobic component. But in general, what you're probably training more than anything else is the efficiency of the ATP creatine phosphate system. And so, yeah, there are certainly benefits for it. And hey, here's the other thing, that it's just economical. Go back to MED, right? Like, what are our big major pieces of that MED is that we try to pick simple over complex, intensity over really everything else. Like intensity is thing we're trying to drive up, and economy over excess. And so to do things like 8 sets of 3 allows us to train pretty heavy, pretty simple, and pretty fast. And you blink and 8 sets of 3 took 8 minutes or 10 minutes. That's pretty economical for the amount of work that you're doing.
You bet.
And if you instead did 3 sets of 8, you're going to do a set of 8, and you're going to have to rest for 6 minutes before you do the second set. And so I think it lands pretty well with MED philosophy of programming at the right point. Here's another interesting concept. Think about DUP, daily undulating periodization. Daily undulating periodization uses really primarily 3 different types of training, 3 different types of stressors, let's call it, during their program. There is the primary strength stressor, which is going to be something like a 3 sets of 5, somewhere in that general ballpark, right? There is going to be a hypertrophy stressor, which is going to tend to be more like that 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10. It could be whatever, right? And there's going to be that, what they call the power stressor, which is going to be like the 8 sets of 3 or 8 sets of 2 or 6 sets of 1, depending on how far along the program you are, right? Now, 8 sets of 3 and 3 sets of 8 are the same volume.
Yep.
They are.
Yep.
They're a different stressor.
They're different critters.
And the interesting thing is, so DUP does that. Now let's go back to Westside. So DUP is a purely concurrent program, 100%. No one would argue about that. The argument we made in the podcast about Westside is that Westside calls themselves conjugate. They're primarily concurrent, but they're also actually conjugate because it's a systematic building. They go from lift to lift to lift, and those lifts build on each other. They're conjugated together. What does Westside do? Westside uses max effort training for their primary strength movement. They utilize speed training, what they call speed training, which is essentially their power work, like DUP does. And they utilize what's called the repetition method, which they use with accessory movements, and DUP tends to use with the main movements, with barbell movements. But they're all really accomplishing the same thing. That hypertrophy, it's that hypertrophy repetition method. It's to get enough work in to drive hypertrophy and get the adaptation we want. So it's really interesting. You start to see this like ribbon that binds it all together. They're very still similar. While they're really different programs, you see the ribbon that says like, well, the underlying thing that we're doing here is actually really, really similar between Westside quote unquote conjugate method and a DUP concurrent method. Very similar.
I had I saw a message on, I don't know where it was. Maybe it was a YouTube comment. I can't remember where I saw it. Yeah,
it wasn't Grindr.
And they said in the message was essentially, isn't HLM DUP?
Could be,
but typically it isn't, because you're not doing every movement every session. You're not training all the movements every day. The frequency isn't high enough. Like,
we've talked about this with Baker. The problem with HLM, again, God, I hate that I hate people who are semantics people.
I know.
And the problem with programming is you have to identify what you're talking about. So that HLM, we've talked about this with Andy Baker, is that HLM can either mean heavy, light, medium, literally talking about the intensity of the movement, like the actual magnitude of the load, or it's high stress, low stress, medium stress. Right? And those are two different things. And
which is how I tend to treat it.
Yeah, it's probably how it should be treated. It makes more sense. Can you do HLM in a DUP type style? Certainly, you can do heavy, which is probably, if it's heavy, it's the power work. It's 8 sets of 3 to 6 sets of 2 to 5 sets of 1 across.
In terms of stress?
In terms of intensity. If it's high in terms of stress, that's probably the 3 sets of 5, 4 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5.
Now, your power work's not going to be that heavy, though, Matt, right? Your 8 doubles
are... My argument would be that if you look at every single program that utilizes power work, that just like everything else, the power work starts very powerful in the beginning of you're training for power in the beginning of the program. And as the program goes along to a peak in strength, the power work actually becomes really fucking heavy, and it ain't that powerful anymore.
Fair enough.
I mean, I've never seen a training program that doesn't do that. Is it possible to not? Sure, right? So my argument there is, could you do an HLM type program that has 3 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 5 as kind of the main strength move? Could you have it with a light day, which is like 3 sets of 8? And could you have it with a day that's like power type work that's like 8 sets of 3? Yeah, that would work just fine for HLM. That's not typically the way it's set up, but certainly it's, again, you can see a ribbon that binds that together. Like it could still be similar. I think HLM becomes very complicated when you start thinking about like, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about stress? Are we talking about intensity? You've got to get that out of the way first. Because my argument would be that the highest intensity day is not the highest stress day. It's the medium stress day, right?
I think you're right. Yep. A heavy set of 5 is not as stressful as 5 sets of 5 at a lighter weight.
That's exactly right. And so we got to identify, well, is H the heavy day or is H the high stress day? Because if it's the heavy day, it's the power day. And if it's the high stress day, it's the 5 sets of 5, 4 sets of 5, maybe 3 sets of 5 day. Yeah. Again, semantics.
And another comment I got on that I saw on that show was a guy says, "Hey, I'm a certified black belt Westside conjugate Mama Jamma, and this is what I think." Okay, man, listen. Probably should start a podcast.
Yeah. Also, we don't care.
Yeah, because I don't care.
Well, and the point here is that I'm not trying to preach exactly what Westside believes, and I'm certainly not trying to proselytize what Westside does or believes. What I'm saying is that I see a similarity and I see some benefit to what Westside has done, what Louis has sort of invented or created or at least adapted over time. And all I would like to argue on our podcast is how I've taken what I've seen over the past 20 years out of the Westside powerlifters and what Louis has done and how I've applied it to my lifters. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, hey, the way Matt's doing it with his lifters is not the way Westside does it, that is okay. Because believe it or not, I don't train any Westside powerlifters.
That's 100%
I've actually, in
true.
spite of, I think I'm a pretty damn good coach, I've actually never coached anybody to ever squat 1,200 pounds in a squat suit. I don't have any of those notches on my belt.
Yep.
But here's what I know. I know that I've used this exact type of training for Nikki Sims, and she just smoked a 435 deadlift, and that's pretty fucking strong for a tall, skinny girl.
Yeah, but
right?
and then what I would say, and then my 2 cents, nah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So, like, this is, again, we use this sort of like, hey, we're going to use our senses, and we're going to use our logic, we're going to use our reason, we're going to use our experience, and we're going to try to derive this. And I'm sure there are people out there that are going to say, well, super training says this, and the evidence says this, and the publications say this. Hey, man, that's fine. I actually just... And it's not that I actually shit on all those things. By the way, I'll read that stuff. I don't mind reading it. I'm not going to just straight shit on it. But here's the deal. How many times... Like, I'm not going to take any studies that have been published and rank them higher than my 20 years of experience in doing this as a full-time job for the past 2 decades. I've learned that, right? Now, can I read something and be like, that's interesting. I'm going to beta test that myself. That might actually be something different. Absolutely, right? But just because Louis did it a certain way, because it was published a certain way or whatever, doesn't mean that's the be-all, end-all or the way to do it. And certainly my way isn't the be-all, end-all way to do it either. But my experience says this is why we do it. I don't actually think that you can get incrementally faster forever, just like I do think you can get incrementally stronger forever, at least until you get so old that you can't, right? We can always keep getting stronger. We can't always keep getting faster. I think it's a short-term physical ability. It's the same thing as endurance, right? Like, how good a shape can you be in, Scott? We can probably get you in pretty damn good shape in a month or 2. Certainly within 3 months, I can get you in fantastic shape for you. After that, can I get you in any better shape? whatever
tough.
that means. It's going to be real tough, man. And it's tough to hold on to. I think that power is one of those things, and this hasn't been readily studied very well. Power is much like endurance, is that it's a physical ability that's quickly gained and quickly lost. It's quickly gained and quickly lost. If I go out and work on my vertical jump, work on like trying to jump up and grab the rim on a basketball goal, and I work real hard on that for 2 or 3 weeks, I can probably jump up and grab the rim on a basketball goal. I'm still a decent athlete. If I don't jump a single time for 2 weeks and I come back, I jump up, I probably don't touch the rim. It's very similar to energy systems type training.
And you'll never hit it with your elbow.
And I'll never hit it with my elbow or touch it with my head or whatever. So there's speed work. I think there's some value to it. I really do. And I think maybe it sets us up for another podcast to talk about why do we use accommodating resistance, bands and chains. I love both. I use both all the time for intermediate and advanced trainees. I don't know that I like one more than the other, chains or bands. I really like them both. For somebody that doesn't train at their house, bands are awfully easy to put in your bag. I think that bands are significantly more stressful on the body. We'll talk about that in a future episode. I think that chains are less stressful. Chains are loud. Chains are heavy. They're not transportable. If you got your own gym in your garage, I think you should have some. Look at Craigslist. Like, go find some old used chains. Like, fine.
Or they're heavy.
Right? Yeah, I think it sets us up for like how then do we take things like accommodating resistance and what does that word even mean? And do a future podcast on accommodating resistance, bands, chains. What's the purpose? When's it appropriate? And how is it used in this quote unquote speed work or dynamic effort work or power work? All those things are sort of interchangeable.
So then, does the power clean serve this power function?
Ooh, excellent question.
In LP?
Does the power clean serve the power function in LP? Do I think it maximizes
in the same way that the speed work does?
I think for the training rate of force development and speed, yes, it does.
Yeah.
For getting you stronger, no, it does not. I actually think that power, again, semantics, quote unquote, power work on a heavy, decently heavy, moderately heavy deadlift with bands will train that rate of force development and that speed, but will also make you stronger. I think the power clean will make you speedy, but will not really make you stronger because I don't think it's heavy enough to do so.
Yeah, and it takes so much time to teach and learn that thing that I could have had somebody do weeks worth of 6 doubles, 8 doubles, 10 singles, and the time it takes them to learn the power clean to the point they can do anything significant with it.
Yeah,
but it probably does. It probably does fill some of those. By
the way, let me throw a monkey wrench in it. I might argue that a hanging power clean would do it better than a power clean off the floor. Because a power clean off the floor always starts slow and accelerates in the second pull. If you put somebody at a hang at the start of the second pull where they literally they're putting the bar essentially in the jump position and they just got to jump and catch it, then the rate of force development is far more important there than it is pulling the bar slow off the floor, holding it in the right position, accelerating through the knee, and then getting to the second pull. How fast is a power clean pull, any sort of clean pull, off the floor? Not fast. So I don't know how much it works, that rate of force development. Like going from 0% force to 100% force, how much does that occur in the power clean? What you're doing is you're going from about 60% force at the start of the second pull to 100% force at the jump. You're not going from 0 to 100. You're going from 60 to 100 again. I don't know what the actual number is.
And then, of course, I think the Olympic weightlifting coach would say, but if we can get them to do 90% off the floor, then you've got somebody that wins.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I think if you look at like Pyrrhus Demas, one of the best lifters of all time, I think if you watch him pull off the floor, it's still real slow off the floor. Guys, gold medalist, I think 3 times in the Olympics, and I think silver once. I'm going to screw that up and we'll get emails. But guy like medaled in the Olympics 4 times. You watch him pull off the floor, pulls slow, speeds up at the knees, boom, hits it hard, massive explosion, super powerful, super explosive. Guy probably had a 40-inch vertical, right? But the pull off the floor is still slow for him because he's trying to hold that long-ass moment arm in his back. And so there's too much to concentrate on to keep your form correct. So I don't think anybody ever pulls very fast off the floor.
Yeah, but I just, man, I don't know anything about power clean. I'll tell you, I can get somebody that can't do it to do it.
Yeah.
But I don't program it. I don't mess with it. I just don't know anything about it. And I sure do like it that way.
Yeah. Economy. It comes back to that economy piece of MED, right? You just like, because we value our time, we utilize things like 8 sets of 3 every minute on the minute, or 8 sets of 3 every 90 seconds, or something like that, as opposed to preaching 10-minute rest periods. There are so few options that I see. Like, when is it necessary to rest 10 minutes for something?
Yeah, it's tough.
It's really rare. And so, because I think we value economy of time, like there's real value to our time. And so we want to do that in an economical way. And I think the speed work is a good way to get there, for sure.
I was having a talk with some people about, what's a master coach, and they're like, are you a master coach? And we were talking about, what does that mean? Right.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not, Olympic weightlifting, I never coach. I mean, the people that I coach, it just doesn't jive for a 55-year-old guy with a hip replacement. So I don't have very much experience with that. If somebody is a triathlete and I needed to program, the triathlon, it ain't CrossFit, but they're going to bike, they're going to swim, they're going to run.
Sure.
And I needed to program those 3 things in conjunction with strength. I would struggle with that. I can't be all the things. Right. So, but I'm pretty good at making people a whole lot stronger to be able to put a lot more discs on the end of the plate than they were when they got in. And
that's right.
Yeah, I just can't do them all. I just can't do it all.
Well, but how many people can, right? Like, you can swing the pendulum the other way. Like, you take the people who are the best at training athletes, power, competitive CrossFitters, snatch, clean and jerk, weightlifting, stuff like that. Can they train the 60-year-old guy with a hip replacement? Probably not.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
So when you start talking about being a master coach, man, it's real. Look, can you be a master surgeon? Can you be a world's best brain surgeon and hand surgeon at the same time? No, you cannot be.
Right.
You could be a world-class brain surgeon or a world-class hand surgeon or any other type of surgery, right? But you get into that jack of all trades, master of none. I think a master coach, what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to be real good at all of it, but not necessarily the best at any of it, right? Like, I can coach a thrower. I can coach sprints. I'm pretty good at it. I can coach vertical, but there are lots of people out there that are better at coaching sprints than me, or better at coaching vertical jump than me, or better at coaching throwing a shot put than me. Right? But like, that's not who I am. I need to be able to do a lot of those things really well, and then be able to coach strength tremendously well. That's my goal. Right. I like to have some experience on all that stuff, but I don't have to be the best in the world at it. I would like to continue to be real, real good at getting people strong, and then generally good at the other stuff.
Yeah, so we end up kind of dipping our toe into all kinds of different things, in service of the getting people stronger. So we'll run some experiments, and I'll dive into other areas of expertise and knowledge and see how it applies to my main goal. And if it doesn't, then I'm just not going to drill down on that piece very much.
Yeah,
there's another show. Yeah. That
wasn't very say that again. Say, there's another show, everybody.
Well, I like programming and stuff.
Yeah, the problem is with programming is it's so easy to get into the weeds.
Yeah, and
we try to stay out of the weeds, and what we end up doing is you sort of get a foot a little bit in the weeds, and then we kind of pull back a little bit on the podcast because I'm not really interested in being in the weeds.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the big picture stuff.
We need to do a few sort of top of the funnel, sort of beginner episodes again here in the near future. We've been too deep for a little while. Go to barbell-logic.com and sign up for the Friday Fives. I've just had a couple of little articles about logic go out on there.
They're good.
And you can go listen. You can go read those things. And so Lynn and other friends write other articles about other technical topics and lifestyle. I mean, you might even read an article about coffee. You might read one about the Texas method. You might read one about training someone who's pregnant. All kinds of interesting things there.
Whiskey, food, recipes, so on and so forth. Lots of good stuff.
Yeah. So go there and sign up for that. and we'll make it worth your time. We never give your email address away, and we will never take advantage of that. So thank you guys for listening. We haven't made an appeal for this lately. Go to iTunes, leave us a review. That's always helpful to us. And more than that, send a link to this show to one of your friends or even one of your enemies and help spread the word, because there's no way to really advertise a show like this if iTunes doesn't pick you up and put you in their up and coming or hot list or whatever the heck. It's all word of mouth. So help us out with that.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
That's what mine is, about 4 inches long.